Professor Verona, 1822. Yeah, Professor Verona.
What is it? I'd like to thank Professor Kokousas for inviting me to speak, and I'm delighted also to be the last speaker. So this is something you have to look forward to. The end of my talk is also a moment of freedom itself. So one may distinguish two types of Hellenophilia during the Greek War of Independence of 1821, a romantic and a practical one. In the previous papers, one has heard examples of the first type. I would like to focus on the second. Castlereagh was an enigmatic person. Among the greatest achievements of his career are lines of poetry, not by him, but about him. Lord Byron, about whom we've heard from Gregory Dowling, among others, hero of the Greek War of Independence, who died in Missolonghi in 1824, did not like him. In a letter he wrote to Murray on the 20th of January 1819, he indicated that the stanzas that he'd written about Castlereagh could be dropped out if they didn't pass the censorship. He referred to him most memorably as an intellectual eunuch. Byron wrote the letter from Venice. The animosity felt by Byron may be considered something English, since one of the criticisms of Castlereagh is that he spoke English with an Irish accent and was of Ulster Presbyterian background. They had different views on several topics. Castlereagh put an end to the Irish Rebellion in 1798, unified Great Britain and Ireland in 1801, masterminded the 6th and 7th coalition, which defeated Napoleon at Leipzig and Waterloo, 1813 and 1815. He chose St. Helena as the emperor's place of exile, and by leading the Congress of Vienna, he had redefined the status quo of Europe after 23 years of constant war, 1792 to 1815. These are controversial topics, of course. However, Byron may have appreciated some details, such as the fact that Castlereagh decided to send back the horses of St. Mark to Venice, had Wellington remove them from Paris and accompanied them by Sir Ralph Dowling, where they arrived in December 1815. And that's what this painting commemorates. That's why you see the Austrian flags. All three of these people were Irish Protestants. Indeed, the restitution of the works of art to Italy, which Castlereagh decided on the 11th of September 1815, was used as the main legal precedent at the Nuremberg trials in 1946 for the topic of restitution of confiscated property in wartime. Byron was a poet abroad. Castlereagh was a politician. It was Castlereagh's duty to assess the relation between the United Kingdom and Greece, since he was Secretary of State from 1812 to 1822. He was in charge of foreign affairs for those 10 crucial years. Indeed, the Greek War of Independence started when he oversaw foreign affairs for the UK. He was therefore a concerned observer. Castlereagh's position was clearly in favor of preserving the status quo. That meant that he promoted the balance of power as established at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. That meant that the UK opposed revolutionary movements. This was the tradition of such Irish thinkers as Edmund Burke, in his reflection on the Revolution of France, published in 1791. Castlereagh's position concerning Greece changed over time. In July 1822, by the way, 200 years ago this year, he decided Greece should be considered a de facto state, if not de jure. He expressed this in his official notes prepared for the Congress of Verona, planned for October 1822. These formed a document of the official position of the UK government and had been approved by Parliament on the 6th of July, 1822. They were brought and used by his fellow Irishman, Wellington, to Verona. when the Congress finally met. The text reads, and I read out the passage which you see in the PowerPoint. What most merits attention at the present moment as bearing upon the future of the negotiation is the degree in which the Ottoman naval power has been paralyzed in the Levant. The total inactivity to which the Turkish commanders in the Morea have been reduced from the failure of all naval support. The consequently probable fall of some of the principal Turkish fortresses, and the progress made by the Greeks towards the formation of a government. This latter circumstance exhibits a new and altogether distinct view of the character of the contest. So long as the force of the insurgents was directed by the mere will of their leaders, the principle of neutrality led to no other consideration than giving an equal rule of accommodation to the parties. But the erection of a government, admitting of formal acts being done on the part of that government, we are more positively brought to deal with them de facto upon matters of blockade and other questions dependent upon the law of nations. Castlereagh in this paragraph makes two striking points. Greece should be considered an independent country and granted belligerent status. Greece is not simply an uprising since it has a constitution and a government. These 2 points indicate that Castlereagh had followed 2 main developments. The adoption of the Greek constitution, which came into effect on the 1st of January 1822. The second was the massacre of Chios in the spring of 1822. If the UK recognized Greece as belligerent, it meant that Castlereagh thought that any reaction after Chios could be considered a war between 2 separate and different countries. The language appears rather timid. However, it is a radical change from his position before, when he terms which he terms non-intervention. In other words, the constitution, the government, and Chios had tipped the balance, which he felt was there before. Indeed, Castlereagh's position in 1821 was clearly one of non-intervention in the internal affairs of other states. This is one of the principles on which countries agreed to the Congress system. Some countries were, in some cases, unjustly partitioned, carved up, and attributed to others. But once that had been completed, the great powers agreed not to intervene in the internal affairs of each other. For Castlereagh, Greece was different in 1822. One may wonder why the balance had not changed before. Indeed, Castlereagh had dealt directly with Kapodistrias at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Kapodistrias later became an important figure in Greece and was first head of state in 1827. By the way, these 2 paintings are in the Waterloo Chamber in Windsor Castle. Castlereagh liked him, as he wrote to his brother Charles. He liked Kapodistrias, quote, very much, and as a minister and a man of business, unquote. And for those of you who are interested in Ionian matters, he wrote that letter the day after the signature for the creation of the United States and the Ionian Islands. So it's exactly after the negotiation had been completed with Kapodistrias. So he's saying he liked him and that he could deal with him after he had effectively dealt with him. This opinion is not at all obvious, since the Austrian foreign minister, Metternich, had an opposite view of Kapodistrias, which I quote because it's rather funny. Kapodistrias is not a bad man, but honestly speaking, he's a complete and thorough fool, a perfect miracle of wrong-headedness. He lives in a world to which our minds are often transported by a bad nightmare. And he wrote that in 1819. This is also to show that there's a different opinion between Castlereagh and Metternich on what concerns Greece. The understanding of Kapodistrias and Castlereagh converged on several points. That would have been even before the Congress of Vienna, where they have known each other better. Castlereagh therefore was aware of matters in Greece directly. He opposed Greek independence until the constitution was enacted and after the massacre of Chios. The United Kingdom recognized Greece after the Battle of Navarino with the London Protocol only in 1830. That was a full 8 years after Castlereagh's suggestion. If the British were generally slow at accepting Greek independence, why did Castlereagh support it already in July 1822? The answer is his Irish background. He claimed Greece could be considered independent because it had a constitution and a government. This is exactly the point made by Edmund Burke in 1791 about France and the revolution. He claimed that the Glorious Revolution, which occurred in England in 1688, was different from the French Revolution of 1789, since the first upheld laws and constitution, and Burke gives example of the Magna Carta, among others, while the French Revolution was based on new abstract ideas. Both Castlereagh and Burke were proposing that the rule of law was an essential element of stability. Indeed, one may say that in Ireland, the debate for them was not about legal structure, but about injustice of individual laws. So it's important to retain a legal framework while improving individual laws. The constitutional issue was crucial for Castlereagh and Kapodistrias, who exchanged letters in 1819 and 1820 about the status quo of the islands west of Greece, organized at the time as the United States of the Ionian Islands, since the Treaty of Paris on the 5th of November 1815. The letters are very interesting because Kapodistrias is arguing procedural questions of the various constitutions of the Ionian Islands before 1815 in terms of the new treaties. And so Castlereagh gives an answer to that. These islands were part of a British protectorate under a High Commissioner. That's why you see the Lion of the Ionian Islands, obviously derived from the Lion of Venice, and Britannia on the other side of the coin. Later on, a famous High Commissioner was, of course, Gladstone, a great Hellenist among other things. But at the time of, at the earlier time, Kapodistrias even went to London to have the High Commissioner changed. That was Maitland, I think, who had been in India before. Kapodistrias had drafted the original constitution of the Peninsular Republic in 1800, the so-called Costituzione Bizantina, and was where he was also born. Therefore, Kapodistrias and Castlereagh discussed not only the Greek situation, but also constitutional matters. The concern that Castlereagh had for revolutionary movements within the Ottoman Empire is clear by his appointment of the new ambassador to Constantinople in 1819, precisely the time when Kapodistrias and Castlereagh are writing to each other and seeing each other. He chose Viscount Strangford. He replaced the English ambassador with an Irish one. His title recalls the name of the loch on which Castlereagh grew up in Northern Ireland. Indeed, it was Viscount Strangford who wrote to the Ottoman court, saying that the United Kingdom would suspend diplomatic ties over the events of the Patriarchate in Constantinople, the hanging of Patriarch Gregory V and the massacre of Chios. So there was an official complaint provoked by Castlereagh, who asked the ambassador to remonstrate. One should not forget a further element. Castlereagh's opposition to the French Revolution stemmed from his personal experience. He had followed the debates in person. He was in Paris in 1791 in the Assembly with great interest. But during the Second Coalition, the revolutionary troops had landed in Ireland in 1798. The French government, the Directoire, had recognized and exiled the king as new ruler of Ireland in case they had won. Moreover, during this time, his local town, Newtownards, had been occupied and set up a committee of public safety, modeled on those of revolutionary France. This gave him a different attitude to those living in England who had not dealt with uprising and invasion in their own lands since 1688. In such situations, the rule of law becomes central focus. It may be for the turbulent history of Ireland that he and Burke both agreed that legal stability is what creates prosperity. The de facto recognition of Greece may stem from his friendship with such persons as Kapodistrias, or even some form of Hellenophilia, but it was mostly practical. Only 50 years before, when I still remember, Castlereagh was very good at reading maps. Only 50 years before, in 1783, Russia had conquered Crimea, and therefore the Black Sea was now mainly divided between Russia in the north and Turkey in the south. Castlereagh's notes for the Congress of Verona, which are mostly focused on the Ottoman Empire, are clear that the independence of Greece was to contain the expansion of these two powers within the Balkans. To conclude and to return to poetry, one of Byron's criticisms of Castlereagh was that he was unclear in his speech and his writings. And this here I quote the Don Juan passage, you see. I think I can explain myself without that sad, inexplicable beast of prey, that sphinx whose words would ever be a doubt. Did not his deeds unriddle them each day, that monstrous hieroglyph, that long spout of blood and water laden Castlereagh? Indeed, Byron was openly and directly involved in the struggle for Greek independence. Castlereagh opposed it until he could single out the Greek Revolution, not as an uprising like the ones he saw elsewhere in South America, Italy, and Spain, but as a new nation ready to be recognized. His duty was to understand what relation the United Kingdom could have with the new Greek government. One may imagine, given his good relations with Kapodistrias between 1815 and 21, he thought such a recognition would lead to concrete diplomatic relations. One may term this a form of practical Hellenophilia. Castlereagh was not a Hellenophile in the romantic sense of the word. He did not fight or write for Greek independence, but his understanding of the rapidly evolving situation in South America, Italy, and Greece made him single out only the latter, not as a revolutionary upheaval, but potentially as a new state with which to have diplomatic relations. Thank you very much.
Presentation.